Chapter 4: The World of Shadows. Struggle is the condition of life. Life dies when the struggle ends. Vissarion Belinsky. Night or day, nothing is visible. Something unpleasant is pulsing in my head. The body is numb and does not obey at all. For a couple more minutes, Eric Grine lay without a single movement until a udar on the box from the outside made him flinch and realize his belonging to the living. The lid opened, and two men stared at him. Closest was a huge 2-meter-tall muscular one, none other than a man-mountain. He leaned his hands on the long handle of a metal mace. A little farther stood a smaller man of Asian appearance with a bow in his hands and a drawn string, his arrow aimed straight at the newcomer's head. Now one awkward movement could become his last. "Looks alive," the archer said, and lowered his weapon. "Welcome," the big man cheered. "Asaju," he said, lifting himself up, and breathed heavily as he looked around. Heavy walls and a sea of light surrounded him. The sun was at its peak, poisonous and scorching rays consuming everything. The stone had heated up and slightly steamed, and massive gates separated reality from the world of shadows. "I am Gerasim Kuznets, and this is my friend Kobayashi Toshiro." The big man extended his hand to the guest and helped him stand. "Just don't ask where the surname is and where the name is," Gerasim laughed. "To be honest, I still don't know myself, and in general he's the brains here, and I'm the strength." Eric Grine," the guest introduced himself with a slight hesitation. Hearing the big man's joke, a faint smile flashed across his face, and somewhere deep inside he even felt relief. "It will be safe here for a few more hours," Gerasim said. "But why don't we just leave the castle?" Eric asked, confused, glancing at the massive shutters of the gates. "Oh yes," Gerasim sighed. "In your opinion, we never thought about that and have been living here for more than a year only because it's wonderful here, and each new day may turn out to be the end." He made a short pause. "There is such a thing living here that you wouldn't even see in your worst nightmare." "Maybe only in a dream," the guest could not resist replying. "But then, is there really nothing that can be done?" The archer looked into the newcomer's eyes in a particularly strict and evaluating way and said, "Having strength but not knowing how to use it, you can easily lose along with it your own life. Many, for months, years, tried to open the passage and break the walls. They even jumped out of the window openings. Everything here is not so simple, a closed circle. Every stone keeps a secret and is guarded by unknown forces." Only now Eric noticed that the archer was not so small after all, even slightly taller than himself. A pleasant, thoughtful gaze of brown eyes was emphasized by thick black hair reaching down to broad, muscular shoulders. Toshiro's voice was calm and confident, and it was clear that his hands always obeyed his intentions flawlessly, while every arrow he loosed found its target with ease. He made no unnecessary movements. "A year?" Eric was surprised. "How do you survive here?" "We engage in robbery and theft," Toshiro explained. "Asaju is a place inhabited not only by vampires, but also by people, even if they have forgotten about conscience. The Red Kin do not touch those few who serve them. They raise livestock, watch over the prisoners they feed on, and create servants from the dead." "I don't want to interrupt you, but we have to leave." Gerasim came to his senses. "Soon there will be shadow here, and others may come in, and on the way we still need to replenish food supplies." Eric tried not to fall behind his new acquaintances. He walked after them, examining the stone structure, and suddenly a feeling of déjà vu came over him. Soon it became clear. This place was familiar to him from his own dreams. Strangely enough, he remembered every turn, passage, corridor. Finally it became darker and cooler. The rays reaching here danced on the walls, thereby giving a magical shimmer to this alien world. Toshiro slowed his step. "Be very careful," he addressed Eric. "There may be traps on the way and rabpires, magic reanimated dead. These creatures look very similar to people, but they have no feelings or consciousness, and therefore are merciless and capable of killing. They do not possess strength beyond that of a human, and therefore are easy to destroy. The weakest spot is the brand mark on the forehead, but both decapitation and a strong blow can stop them. Remember, once wounded, they do not heal. They can still move for some time, but only by inertia. And when death comes, their bodies almost immediately turn into rot, the archer explained. This is not the higher race of ancient vampires, behind whom stand many centuries and human lives. Representatives of the red kin are almost impossible to kill, and all who have encountered them have long been resting in peace. Rabpirs have no will or consciousness of their own, but they have an instinct to serve their creator. Moreover, despite not possessing intelligence, they pose a huge danger, as they move in groups and can mentally connect with their master. Toshiro spoke very quietly so that they would not gain extra listeners. Ah, and one more thing. Rabpires can disguise themselves as people you knew before and even speak like them. Always pay attention to the brand on the forehead. But an ordinary living person can also be branded, right? Eric said, confused. Yes, they can, Toshiro replied, but when you see these creatures you will understand who is in front of you. Their smell, behavior, skin color, everything somehow erases all doubts, and your mind understands. It is no longer a human. They went deeper and deeper into the stone city, where there was no longer any place for light. Sometimes they even had to walk one after another so as not to get lost. But most corridors were lit by torches, and visibility hardly complicated movement. Something at the end of the corridor drew attention. From afar, a stomping began to be heard, which was clearly growing louder. The warriors had to hide behind a huge statue of a griffin, which very conveniently stood nearby. Sitting under the wing, they could see those who were approaching them and remain in relative safety. The Rabpires marched in formation, and each had a weapon visible behind their back. Strange, very, Toshiro whispered. These creatures rarely adhere to formation order. The pulse quickened. Eric was seized by an incomprehensible feeling. He saw before him seemingly ordinary people, but at the same time perfectly understood that there was no life in them. That was what caused the shiver, and fear filled his insides. They were not vampires, but they caused a terrible disgust. The guest was only glad that these creatures moved quite quickly and soon disappeared from his sight. Something is wrong here. The archer did not hide his surprise. And just as luck would have it, all the food is gone, Garrison fumed. And I'm hungry. Besides, we are almost there, since we're here. It would be a sin not to take something with us. They passed several more passages and found themselves in the living quarters of the servants. The houses were wedged into each other in layers, leaving between them only narrow streets that turned either to the right or to the left. Without knowing in advance where to go, one could easily get lost. This rather unusual place resembled a city, only located underground. Here, instead of a radiant sky, there were stone vaults, and instead of green trees and grass, strange plants accustomed to darkness and mushrooms. In this silence, the only company for the infiltrators was a draft and a light fog running at their feet. Approaching the warehouse, they noticed that not only were there no guards, but even the door was not locked. From there came a cold like from a freezer, and inside were stored everything from raw meat and animal organs to the remains of human flesh. On the floor, where the temperature was much higher than in the air, in crates lay vegetables of unknown kinds. Garrison and Toshiro began to stuff their backpacks with the products they needed, while Eric began to look everything over. Dried chicken feet, some kind of grain, various crystals, there was everything here. Some components he had already seen, and even then only on the shelves of Sekus. Only this time everything was completely different. Much of it caused unpleasant feelings, up to disgust. Off to the side, not far from him, there stood a basket with weapons, several battle axes and classical Greek swords. For a few minutes he examined the steel and the forging. A lot of it was rusty and dull, but there was nothing better nearby. Eric decided to take with him one blade with a short handle and a small edge. Tucking the chosen weapon into his belt, he approached his newly made friends, who continued stuffing their bags and spoke in a whisper. And now what? There was a double meaning hidden in his words. A man whose life had again changed abruptly and was gaining new turns was in complete confusion. He did not know what to do next or how to proceed. The archer looked at him with surprise, then lightly nodded his head. To learn a lot. You will have to walk the path of an infant again. Be attentive and careful. That is the most important thing. And now we will head home, Garrison added. Stepping outside, Toshiro considered it necessary to explain what he should now consider his home. Asaju Castle is enormous. On the surface, from the city streets, only a small part of it is visible, while the main part is hidden in the underground beneath Dragor itself. In the lowlands live all those who are not allowed to live freely. We, however, found a secluded place in one of the towers. It is located above all the others. We still have to climb a considerable number of steps before we get there, but it is one of the safest places here, where you can sleep peacefully and know that you have a chance to wake up tomorrow. On the way back, they encountered several more enemy groups, but remained unnoticed. These creatures were clearly searching for someone or something, so the travelers had to be extremely careful and change their route. And you are lucky, because your crossing happened at noon. Most likely, it is you they are all looking for. Toshiro glanced at Eric sideways with suspicion. The guest had no idea what he was talking about, and as usual, thoughtfully looked away. In this world, where its own rules applied, he did not understand at all why they might be looking for him, but something told him that there were reasons for everything. At that time, no one yet knew that the witch had had a vision of falling in love with a human, and therefore for several months she had come to him in dreams, desperately trying to prevent what she had seen with the third eye. Her attempts proved futile. Eric ended up in Asaju, and now nothing could stop the inevitable. "Watch out!" Gerasim suddenly shouted. Rabpirs were approaching from all sides. There were about 100 of them. The travelers had fallen into an ambush, and without attacking, they were being pressed into a circle. The ringing of armor and swords stood in the air. A stench hung. Though the bodies did not decompose, they emitted a foul odor like that of corpses. Breathing became more and more difficult, and with each new glance at the horde of killers, panic grew, and strength gradually faded. Kobayashi Toshiro and Gerasim Kuznets often fought groups of these creatures and handled them well, but this time there were too many. Even if they miraculously managed to defeat these, reinforcements would soon come to the Rabpires. Arrows released by Toshiro rushed at great speed, striking the marks on the foreheads, after which they dropped dead. Gerasim, swinging his massive mace, dealt devastating blows to the enemy, and by the number of victims who fell by his hand, did not yield to his brother in arms. Without hesitation, and not intending to lag behind, Eric also pulled out the awkward sword taken from the warehouse and cut off several heads. His good reaction and speed in movement helped him. Stepping over the defeated bodies, the dead kept advancing, not changing their tactics, closing the circle. Taking advantage of the newcomer's inexperience, they knocked the weapon out of Eric's hands and threw him onto his back on the ground. He flailed like a beetle turned upside down, and feeling the strength of a dozen Rabpires, could do nothing. It already seemed to him that his life was about to end, but the creatures hesitated. He knew that even if they did not kill him now, but took him captive, sooner or later death itself would come for him personally, and in terrible agony. His salvation came from the arrows released by Toshiro that pierced the flesh of the enemies. Several bodies instantly went limp and collapsed onto the frightened Eric. He had to free himself very quickly from the weight of the crushed creatures, repelling the attack of the next ones. Under their feet squelched a mash of brownish slurry and the remains of those fallen in battle. For some time they tried to fight back, but the creatures did not grow fewer. They were squeezed into a vice. Satisfied grins ran across the branded faces. How many of their own had died did not concern them, only the result mattered. Toshiro, Gerasim, and Eric, on the contrary, were not even thinking of surrendering. They stood back to back, feeling support and a surge of new strength. "I won't be taken alive!" The big man bellowed and crushed 2 skulls with one blow of his mace. His heart was pounding, his hand trembling with fatigue, but he did not stop for a moment, continuing to swing his weapon left and right. "None of us will surrender alive," Toshiro added. This battle became a struggle not for life, but for death. Twilight swallowed the land, wrapping the castle walls in darkness. The creatures filled with shadow. Clouded eyes flared with some hellish fire, and from their throats burst a sound, soul-chilling and ear-cutting. Legs gave way, and strength was being spun out of the fighting bodies like a thread, along with the hope of seeing the sunrise one more time, even if only from a window, but filled with energy and life. From behind, a Rabpir attacked the archer, but Eric managed to shield his comrade with himself, taking a piercing blow to the shoulder. Pain shot through his body like lightning, and he dropped to his knees. Their lives hung by a thread when suddenly a thin silver ray lightly danced on one of the walls, and a gentle warm breeze with a soft fragrance blew. Before Eric's eyes everything darkened, and he no longer saw anything clearly, only strange images, one of which flickered especially brightly and rapidly, and his consciousness was being pulled into darkness. Eric, lying on the bed wrapped head to toe in a blanket, still did not understand whether he had woken up or not. Vague images continued to flash before his eyes. He tried to recall the events that had happened to him recently, but everything felt very much like a dream. The only thing he clearly remembered was a lot of blood, and his hands were also covered in blood. Now he would never be able to wash it off in his life. Eric shuddered. An indistinct thought came to his tired and exhausted mind. He was a killer. Never in his life had he used a weapon to take someone's life. But at that moment the fate of others depended on his actions. Those who had let him feel the selfless shoulder of friendship, and therefore he could not hesitate, putting himself under the blow. And could it even be called killing people who had long been dead anyway? Hellish pain pierced his arm. He threw the blanket onto the floor and looked at his wound. Strangely, there was no damage as such, only a small knotted scar. Eric looked around. The huge room flooded with sunlight strongly resembled his room in the Dandelion. Similar furniture and surroundings. Through the unpleasant feeling as if something were growing inside him, he still found the strength to get up. A clean shirt lay nearby. Putting it on, he approached the door and opened it slightly. There was another fairly large room where two men were. She said it could still worsen significantly, came the words of the man standing by the burning fireplace with a cauldron hanging over the fire. He carefully stirred its contents, adding new ingredients. "I don't understand that woman." A grimace twisted the face of the big man, who was diligently cleaning his mace. A quiet creak of the hinges made them turn around. "Come in," Toshiro said hastily. His legs would not obey. Overcoming the pain, he walked to the sofa and sat down next to Gerasim. The air carried the aroma of cooking food and spices, teasing their hungry stomachs. "I have to thank you," the archer addressed Eric. "You saved my life." "As did you mine," he replied, smiling sincerely. "Then we're even," Toshiro added. "How is your shoulder?" Gerasim could not hide his curiosity. "It hurts," Eric cut short. "I don't understand anything. I was wounded." "But there is no wound, only a scar." "What even happened?" "You lost consciousness, and we were surrounded. There were more and more enemies. They were running to the call that, with the setting of the sun, began to burst from their throats. Something unimaginable was happening. We could no longer repel their attacks," Toshiro sighed. "If not for the witch, we would all have died," Gerasim added to the archer's words. "The witch?" Eric looked questioningly at his brothers in arms. "Yes, the witch," he confirmed. "A mysterious figure who has lived here for more than a century. Legends about her are passed down year after year from the previous inhabitants of this tower to the current ones." Gerasim gestured toward the bookshelves along the walls. "Hundreds of records about her are kept here. Some accounts say she is cruel and terrible. Others, on the contrary, say she is noble and kind. There is no single opinion. We ourselves do not know what she is like, but we are sure of one thing. She is very powerful, and one should keep one's distance from her." For several minutes everyone fell silent. Silence hung in the room, broken only by the crackling of firewood. The men could not take their eyes off the tongues of flame greedily consuming the wood. It seemed that there were only a few wonders of nature one could watch forever. Raindrops, nourishing the earth and calming the soul, fire consuming everything and igniting the heart, and of course the naked body of a beloved woman, giving passion, strength, and faith in oneself. Hungry stomachs growled warlike. Toshiro poured the stew into bowls, and it seemed to take much longer than the food disappearing as it entered their mouths. There is no wound only because the witch smeared your shoulder with some kind of her healing ointment, Gerasim said, chewing a piece of bread, but she added that it is unclear how it will affect you further. The outcome of what is happening is unknown to us, but we can say for sure, a hunt has been declared on you by the Red Kin. Toshiro bored his eyes into Eric, and if your crossing had taken place at sunset, as it usually does, you would have long since been with them. Probably, I should thank Sikus. I think only thanks to him I was granted amnesty, and the sentence was carried out at noon. Eric looked aside. For some time, the three men continued to discuss something heatedly. From the outside, it seemed that they had known each other for many years, and the castle was their home. When the day was at its height, they left their shelter. They understood that going out was risky. At every step an enemy could appear, and the witch's one-time help gave no guarantees. But staying inside, locked between four walls, was meaningless. It was not life. The choice did not seem the wisest, but movement and struggle in this place always brought more benefit than inaction. Descending a very long staircase, Eric realized that the return would be exhausting. This outing resembled an excursion into an unknown city, only instead of sights he would have to study, see, and learn much. When the staircase led into a corridor, Eric turned back, trying to remember the way, and saw a fork behind him, and one of the passages was blocked with stones. "What's there?" he asked curiously. "That is the entrance to the second tower, where the immortal witch lives, the keeper of the secrets of this castle," Gerasim replied. "These are the two safest places in all of Asaju. With a dark heart, it is impossible to enter them. Though she has no need for shelter, she cannot be killed. She is like the soul of these walls." Soon they entered a huge hall, whose vaults were supported by columns and entwined with wild grapevine. Streams murmured everywhere, green grass rustled underfoot, and rays of sunlight penetrated through the window openings, breaking through the gloomy clouds brought by the wind. There was more than enough space for training, and none of the warriors intended to waste time or simply idle. Toshiro pulled a naginata from behind his back. Yes, besides the bow, he carried a rather interesting Japanese cold weapon with a long, meter-long handle of oval section and a curved single-edged blade about 30 centimeters long. But he rarely used it in battle. He asked Gerasim to step aside a little. "My friend, you understand yourself that with your mace he definitely won't manage." Steel flashed in the air. Eric tried to parry the blow, but unsuccessfully. From a fairly strong and almost unexpected attack, he fell to the ground. "It's nothing," Toshiro said, extending his hand and helping Eric to his feet. "It happens. Let's try again," and attacked again. Several swings and misses. Eric dodged the strikes a couple of times and once tried to block, but again failed. It did not go very well at once, but he had persistence in abundance, and so, not giving up, he tried to grasp the art of close combat. Eric Grain was a stocky, muscular man, slightly above average height, and with a distinctly pronounced trait, lack of patience. His movements showed that he acted first and thought later, but his body structure helped him easily cope with many physical loads. The training did not last long, but the pain from the wound inflicted by the living dead did not let go, and he clearly understood, for now it was only a chain of attempts and mistakes. In a real battle, any misstep could be fatal. And therefore, despite the pain, he made every effort. "Perhaps that's enough for today." The archer sat down next to Gerasim. "To feel the mystique of the sword is not given to every man, but you have certain abilities. If you are persistent, you will succeed." From exhaustion, Eric collapsed flat onto the grass. Gerasim laughed. "That's right, get some rest. We still have to overcome more than 100 steps upward, and I am not going to carry you today." It seemed the corridor was endlessly long and led nowhere. The pain receded. Eric was running, trying to catch up with a shadow. In a daze, he burned with the desire to find out whose it was. With each step, his legs grew heavier, and he was falling behind the goal. His head spun, and the pain returned so sharply that he was jerked by a convulsion, and he came to his senses. He was still lying on the grass, and not far away, to the side, Toshiro and Gerasim were honing their strikes. He was still very far from the mastery of those two, but he nevertheless had an advantage in speed and quick reaction. The road home was difficult. Continuing their ascent, from fatigue the warriors almost did not speak. Several times they stopped to catch their breath. It is much harder to climb up steps than to go down.